He buried his children, was betrayed by his friends, and watched his empire rot from within. Still, he never broke. Most men today collapse under half that weight, but Marcus Aurelius didn't just survive, he wrote through it. These aren't abstract ideas or polished philosophy. They are battle-tested truths from a man who woke up each day and chose not to die. Here are 7 things he lived by, and most men still refuse to see them. Stay with this, because the last one explains why you still feel hollow, even when you're doing everything right. 1. Suffering doesn't make you weak, it forces you to see. Marcus Aurelius was not a man who suffered once. He was a man who suffered constantly. He buried his children not in metaphor, but in soil. He watched Rome devour itself from the inside while calling it duty. He was betrayed by allies, drained by war, and surrounded by plague. But what broke most men around him did not break him. Not because he was stronger, but because he understood something they refused to face. Pain is not proof that something has gone wrong. Pain is proof that something real is happening. That is the first brutal truth. Pain is not weakness, it is contact. Contact with what is raw, what is actual, what cannot be talked around. Most men do not survive this kind of contact. They retreat into anger, into distraction, into noise. They blame women, politics, their childhood, anything but themselves. But Marcus did not do that. He used the pain. He studied it. He let it shape him into someone with fewer illusions. He did not ask why he was suffering. He asked what the suffering was trying to show him. That is what separates him from most men. Not his strength, not his power, but his willingness to see. Because the truth is this: suffering is not the end of the road. It is the beginning of recognition. It tells you what you cling to. It tells you who you pretend to be. And it tells you what needs to fall away. Marcus understood this. That is why he could suffer more than most men and still rise. Not harder, not colder, but clearer. If you are in pain now and you are looking for relief, Marcus would not give you comfort. He would give you vision, because the pain you are feeling might be the first real thing that has happened to you in years. And the only thing left is whether you will listen to it. 2. Blame is a lie that keeps you numb. Marcus Aurelius was surrounded by treachery. He held power, but he was not protected. Those beneath him were dishonest. Those beside him were greedy. And those closest to him proved the most dangerous. He had every excuse to fall into resentment. He had every reason to hate, to point outward, to name names, to make a villain out of everyone who failed him. But he didn't. That is the second brutal truth. Blame is a lie. It feels like clarity, but it's a disguise. It keeps you from feeling the sharper truth underneath, the one you cannot throw at someone else, the one that requires silence, not a story. Most men need someone to blame, because if there is no enemy, then the pain must be theirs to carry, and they do not want that. They would rather be angry than aware. They would rather rehearse the injustice than face the responsibility. But Marcus chose a different path. He refused to let resentment write his story, not because he was naive, not because he was soft, but because he understood what blame steals from a man. It steals discipline, it steals attention, and worst of all, it steals power. Blame feels like motion, but it is paralysis. It locks you into a cycle where nothing changes except your bitterness. It is a defense mechanism disguised as morality. Marcus did not let himself become a victim of the people around him, because once you see yourself as a victim, you become passive. And once you become passive, you wait for others to fix what they broke. That is how men stay broken, not by what happened, but by waiting for someone else to make it right. Marcus knew he could not control betrayal, but he could control his posture. He could control his integrity. He could choose how to respond to what life handed him. That choice is still available to you, but only if you stop rehearsing who hurt you. Only if you stop performing the story where they are the reason you are stuck. You are not here to stay angry. You are here to stay awake. And until you let go of the need to blame, you will not see clearly. Not them, not yourself, not the road ahead. 3. The exit was always there. He chose to stay. Marcus Aurelius lived in a time where suicide was not taboo. It was honored. It was seen as a rational end to a painful life. Even among Stoics, ending one's life was considered a noble escape, a final act of control. And Marcus knew this. He wrote about it. He saw others take that path, but he never did. That is the third brutal truth. The exit was always there. He simply chose not to take it. Not because he was happy, not because he was fulfilled, but because he believed there was something more important than comfort. Duty, order, responsibility to the world, even if the world did not return the favor. Most men today collapse when life becomes heavy. They imagine that nothing matters, that silence would be better than failure, that disappearance is cleaner than endurance. But Marcus did not think like that. He reminded himself why he was alive. Not in grand language, not in poetic metaphors, but in quiet, honest lines scribbled in the margins of his meditations. He told himself to get up, to move forward, to continue, not because he felt like it, but because something in him knew the feeling would pass and the responsibility would remain. That is something most men forget. Feelings are real, but they are not final. They scream, but they do not decide. The pain you feel may be sharp, but it is not the full truth. There is something behind it, and Marcus believed in giving that part of himself a voice, the part that remembers, the part that endures, the part that does not want to vanish, but to live rightly. He stayed, not because it was easy, not because he was rewarded, but because life, even in ruin, still asked something of him. That is the burden, but also the gift. And if you are watching this, if you have ever thought about disappearing, understand this. You are not broken for wanting relief. You are not weak for wanting it to stop. But you are more than that desire. You are still being asked to stay, not by society, not by expectations, but by something quieter, something older, something that still believes you have work to do. Marcus heard that voice, and that is why he stayed, even when it would have been easier to go. 4. Discipline is not performance, it is alignment. Marcus Aurelius woke up early, not because it looked impressive, not because it won praise. He woke up because he understood something most men never learn. Discipline is not about achievement. It is not about checking off boxes or winning admiration. It is about remembering who you are before the world tries to make you forget. That is the fourth brutal truth. Discipline is not performance. It is alignment. Marcus reminded himself often and without ceremony that he was not here to be comfortable. He was here to serve his nature, to live in accordance with what he believed was right. And that meant showing up, especially when he didn't want to. Most men drag themselves through routine with resentment. They treat effort as punishment. They treat consistency as burden. They move through their lives as if someone else is watching, judging, scoring. But Marcus lived differently. He believed your life is measured not by what you do when it's easy, but by whether you obey your principles when no one is watching. He did not see the early morning as a grind. He saw it as a clearing, a sacred return to intention before the noise took over. Because without this discipline, the world decides for you. You fall into reaction. You chase validation. You collapse into habits that feel urgent but mean nothing. Discipline for Marcus was a way of keeping his soul intact. It was not punishment. It was preservation. When the empire collapsed around him, when allies turned into enemies, when illness stole what he loved. This was his anchor. His actions, his rituals, his refusal to be ruled by mood or impulse. That is what most men misunderstand. They think discipline is about success, but success is unstable. It changes, it fades. Discipline is not about outcomes. It is about fidelity to yourself. It is how you return to your core when everything else is falling apart. Marcus did not rely on motivation. He relied on memory. He remembered what he stood for, and he acted like it was still worth honoring. That is the invitation, not to force yourself into discipline, but to realize that it is the only way to remain yourself in a world that profits off your confusion. 5. Beauty is still here, even when everything is dying. Marcus Aurelius lived in decline. The Roman Empire was unraveling. The institutions were corrupt. The people were restless. The gods were silent. He could have become numb. He could have retreated into bitterness, into cynicism, into cold analysis. But he didn't. That is the 5th brutal truth. Beauty is still here, even when everything is dying. You just have to be willing to look for it. Marcus believed that the world was falling apart, but his soul didn't have to. He searched for order where others only saw collapse. He wrote about the shape of a fig, the way dew clings to a leaf, the sound of bread cracking in the oven. These were not distractions. They were reminders that underneath the surface decay, something sacred still moved. Most men today have lost this. They see ugliness and assume it is everything. They confuse awareness with negativity. They believe that seeing clearly means becoming hollow. But Marcus never let the ugliness blind him to what was still intact. He trained his attention, not just his logic. He did not wait for beauty to appear. He hunted for it. And when he found it, he held it as proof that life was still worth engaging. That is something most of us forget. When pain arrives, perception narrows. When betrayal happens, we distrust everything. When the world disappoints us, we turn away from it entirely. But Marcus did the opposite. He looked closer. He paid attention to the small, the still, the easily missed. Because that is where beauty survives. Not in spectacle, but in subtlety. Not in escape, but in stillness. This is not about optimism. This is about discipline of the eye and discipline of the soul. To see clearly without collapsing. To notice something good even when the rest has gone rotten. To say, yes, this world is broken, and yes, there is still something here worth loving. Marcus didn't turn away from decay. He lived inside it. And still, he chose to see what was real, not just what was ruined. If you have become numb, if you are starting to believe that nothing matters, remember this. It is not that beauty is gone. It is that your eyes have grown tired. Train them again, like Marcus did. Because the soul does not starve from pain. It starves from blindness. 6. The body can save the mind if you let it move. Marcus Aurelius carried the weight of an empire. He ruled through crisis, through death, through betrayal. And he did not rely on inspiration or belief to keep himself going. He relied on movement. That is the 6th brutal truth. The body can save the mind if you let it move. Marcus knew that philosophy alone was not enough. Thinking cannot rescue you when the storm is inside your chest. When thoughts become knives, when the mind spirals, you cannot always think your way out. But you can move. He trained, he exercised, he walked. He put his body into motion even when his spirit felt stagnant, because he understood something most modern men forget. The mind is not separate from the body. The soul is not some floating idea. It lives in the breath, in the posture, in the repetition of disciplined action. Most men today treat the body like a project, something to sculpt for approval, something to punish for failure, something to ignore until it breaks. But Marcus treated the body like a partner. He used it to regulate himself, to return to presence, to re-enter the world when the mind became too abstract to navigate. This is not about working out. It is about remembering that you are not a machine made of thought. You are a creature made of muscle, blood, rhythm, and tension. And your pain does not only live in your head. It lives in your shoulders, in your stomach, in your breath, in the way you stand when no one is looking. When Marcus felt crushed by grief or burdened by obligation, he did not always seek a solution. Sometimes he just moved. He walked through the gardens. He lifted weights. He cleaned himself. He placed his body into motion as a way of finding rhythm again. Most men underestimate how much healing happens when nothing is spoken. No analysis, no journaling, just motion, just returning to what is physical and therefore real. You are not broken because your mind is tired. You are not weak because you cannot think clearly. You may just be trapped in stillness, paralyzed by overthinking, and Marcus would not tell you to push through it. He would tell you to move, even a little, even slowly, even if it does not feel like it matters, because the body remembers what the mind forgets. And sometimes your next step is not a thought. It is an actual step. One foot, then the other, back into the world. 7. The soul has a room you keep forgetting exists. Marcus Aurelius lived through constant noise, political decay, public failure, personal loss. He didn't run from it, but he didn't absorb all of it either. He went somewhere the world could not follow. That is the 7th and final brutal truth. The soul has a room you keep forgetting exists, and you are allowed to return there no matter what you've been through. Marcus called it the inner citadel, a place within himself that could not be touched by corruption or betrayal or grief. A silent space untouched by praise, untouched by criticism. It was not a fantasy. It was not detachment. It was his anchor. Most men today have no such place. Their minds are overrun with alerts, obligations, opinions. Their peace is outsourced to the next distraction, the next agreement, the next temporary high. But Marcus had no such luxury. He couldn't escape the chaos around him, so he created distance within it. He taught himself to return to stillness, even in the middle of war, not by running away, but by remembering what could not be taken. That is what most men miss. You do not need more time. You do not need a better environment. You do not need anyone else to understand you. You just need to return to the part of you that is not exhausted, the part that still sees clearly, the part that is not in crisis, even when everything else is. It is easy to forget that place, especially when you are hurt, especially when the world is loud and your thoughts are louder. But the forgetting is the problem, not the pain, not the pressure, the forgetting. Marcus did not find peace by fixing the empire. He found peace by separating himself from it long enough to think clearly again, not for hours, sometimes just for a moment, a breath, a reminder. You have that same room inside you. You may have boarded it up. You may have denied it exists, but it is still there. And it does not ask you to heal everything. It only asks you to return, not to escape responsibility, but to remember that your identity is not equal to your circumstances. That is what saved Marcus. And that is what might save you, not a new life, but a deeper contact with the one you already have. Now that you know the 7 truths Marcus Aurelius lived by, the question is no longer what he endured. The question is what you will do with what you've just seen. These were not lessons for history. They were written in the middle of collapse, in grief, in pressure, in isolation. He wrote them to himself, and now they belong to you. You know that suffering clarifies. You know that blame distorts. You know that staying is not weakness, and silence is not failure. You know where peace actually lives, and what must be stripped away to reach it. So what happens now? The world will keep shouting. The temptation to retreat, to perform, to numb yourself, it will keep coming back. You will forget. You will slip. But the truths will not change. They are not motivational. They are structural. And they only work if you live them. So the question is not whether Marcus was strong. It's whether you are ready to stop lying about why you feel lost. Because the path has always been there. You just have to walk it without needing to be seen. Will you do that, or will you go back to sleep?